I've always hated the phrase, be the bigger man. It's what people say when they want you to eat the crap someone else served, then smile like it was cake. My name's Elliot. I'm 34, live in Oregon, and for most of my adult life, I've been the peacekeeper in my family. I was the calm one, the fixer, the guy who never raised his voice even when everything inside me screamed. Growing up, my parents, and Richard, called me the mature one, while my younger brother Mason got away with just about everything short of arson. They said he had a wild heart. I called it what it was, entitlement. And for years, I kept brushing off the little things, until one day, the little things became the biggest betrayal of my life. To understand how bad it got, you need to know what our family was like. Dad worked as a contractor, ran a small business fixing up homes, and Mom managed a boutique downtown. We were comfortable, not rich, not poor, just suburban middle class with a nicely trimmed lawn and Sunday dinners no one really enjoyed but showed up for anyway. Mason was 4 years younger than me and always the golden boy. He had charm. That magnetic, smooth talker kind of energy that made teachers give him second chances and made girls fall for him, even when they knew better. Me? I was more reserved. I got good grades, got into college, got a degree in finance, then landed a steady job right out of school. I thought if I did everything right, I'd be seen too. But that spotlight never moved. Mason, on the other hand, flunked out of community college, bounced between jobs, and spent most of his 20s figuring things out while living in the guest house behind my parents' home. And every time he messed up, Mom would sigh dramatically and say, "He just needs a little support." Dad would nod and talk about how some people take longer to find their path. And I, like a fool, kept my mouth shut. I met Claire when I was 27. She was everything Mason wasn't, grounded, kind, quietly funny in a way that made you lean in just to hear her say something clever. We met at a friend's wedding, and 2 years later, we were married. I thought she was my person. I thought we were building something real. We bought a modest 2-bedroom house, talked about kids, even started picking out baby names one night over wine and laughter. For the first time, I felt like I was allowed to come first in someone's eyes. I wish I could say I noticed the signs early, but the truth is, I was blind. Claire said Mason was just your typical little brother, annoying, harmless, full of hot air. I remember the first time I saw them laughing together too long at a cookout. She swatted his arm. He leaned a little too close. It made my stomach twist for half a second, but I let it go. You don't want to be that guy, right? The paranoid, insecure husband who accuses people of things because of a look. So I swallowed it. Again and again. Things between me and Claire started to shift slowly. At first, it was the distance. Less eye contact. Fewer shared jokes. She'd say she was tired or had work stuff on her mind. Then came the arguments. Small ones at first, over laundry, over dinner plans, but they escalated quickly. She snapped easier, grew colder, and one night, after I asked her point blank what was going on, she told me she needed space. 2 weeks later, she was gone. I was devastated. I moved through those days and a days, going to work, pretending to function, crashing on the couch because the bed felt like a grave. My parents tried to console me in their weirdly distant way. Sometimes people just grow apart, my mom said. Don't take it personally. My dad, ever the emotionally stunted type, clapped my shoulder and mumbled something about how, at least you didn't have kids. Then came the real gut punch. 3 months after Claire left, I was sitting in my car outside a grocery store when I got a text from a friend. Just a screenshot. No message. No explanation. I stared at it for a full minute before my brain caught up. It was a Facebook post from Mason's profile, a black and white ultrasound image. Captioned, "Can't wait to meet you, little bean." A string of heart emojis followed. And Claire's profile was tagged. My heart didn't drop. It detonated. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't drive home. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My ex-wife. My little brother. A baby. Suddenly, everything made sense. The laughter. The distance. The timing of her leaving. I'd been played for a fool, by both of them. And the worst part? No one told me. No one had the decency to say a word. That night, I confronted my parents. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just asked, "Did you know?" And they didn't even try to deny it. My mom bit her lip and nodded. "We wanted to tell you, Elliot, but you were in such a fragile place." My dad, arms crossed, added, "What good would it have done to rub salt in the wound?" salt in the wound. I stood there in their living room, every childhood memory collapsing like a house of cards. You knew he got my wife pregnant, and you let me find out on Facebook? Mom sighed. That tired, performative sigh she always gave when she wanted to make it about her. You have to understand, it wasn't ideal. But they're young. They made a mistake. They're trying to do the right thing now. And we were hoping, maybe, you could find it in your heart to be the bigger man. The bigger man. That phrase again. I didn't say much after that. Just walked out, got in my car, and drove aimlessly for hours until I ended up at a cheap motel with flickering lights and paper-thin walls. I laid on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, not just with betrayal, but with something sharper, clarity. Mason and Claire didn't just betray me. My parents did too. They chose them. They always had. But this time, they didn't just overlook his recklessness. They covered it. And now they wanted me to clean up the mess? Be the mature one? The stable one? Again? 2 weeks passed. I didn't answer calls. Didn't respond to texts. Just existed, quietly unraveling and trying to stitch myself back together. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mom. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to hear what she could possibly say now. Elliot, she began, her voice syrupy, too sweet. I hope you're feeling better. We've been talking, and, well, Claire and Mason are struggling a bit. It's hard getting ready for a baby when you're just starting out. They don't have the resources you do. I stayed silent. She continued. Your father and I thought, it might be a beautiful gesture if you help them. Maybe help them buy a house. Something small, nothing fancy. Just a way to show you've truly forgiven them. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the phone in disbelief. You want me to buy them a house? It would mean a lot to Mason, she said, as if this was some Hallmark special and not a Kafkaesque nightmare. And to us, if you really want peace in this family. I didn't respond right away, but when I finally spoke, I kept my voice steady. You're right, I said. That sounds fair. Mom exhaled, relieved. Oh, honey, I knew you'd come around. I hung up the phone and started planning what they never saw coming. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was angry. I'd passed that stage. Anger was loud, chaotic. What I felt now was cold, quiet, calculated. A kind of stillness that only comes after something inside you dies. I sat on the edge of my motel bed, staring at a blank notepad, turning over their words in my head like stones in a stream. If you really forgave him, you'd buy them a house. That sentence kept echoing. Not because it hurt anymore, but because it was so absurd it had to be real. I knew my parents were blind when it came to Mason, but this wasn't blindness. This was willful betrayal dressed up as family unity. And now, for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to fix it. I started documenting everything. I wrote down the dates, the conversations, the phone call, the ultrasound post, every little moment that had felt off over the years, like puzzle pieces that finally snapped into place. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, but I knew I needed all the pieces in front of me. Not because I wanted revenge yet, but because I needed proof. Not for them, for me. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I didn't imagine the favoritism, the manipulation, the complete disregard for my dignity. 3 days after the call, my dad texted me a photo of a small house listing. A 3-bed, 2-bath fixer-upper in a neighborhood not far from their place. Something like this would be perfect for them, he wrote, followed by a thumbs-up emoji. I didn't respond. 2 hours later, my mom followed up with a voice note, her voice chipper and upbeat. Mason and Claire loved the one we sent. It needs some love, but your father said you could probably handle the reno costs too, right? Oh, and you'll want to act fast. The market's moving quickly. No mention of asking me if I wanted to do this. No thank you. No apology. Just a casual assumption that I'd fork over tens of thousands of dollars so the people who shattered my life could play house. That's when I realized something. In their minds, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. Mason finally reached out a few days later. He texted me a selfie, him and Claire in front of a baby store, grinning like high schoolers. Caption, getting closer to the big day. Hope you're doing good, man. Let's catch up soon. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply, but I saved it. I didn't want to be around anyone. I stopped going into the office, worked from the motel or coffee shops nearby. My coworkers knew something was off, but I didn't say much. Just that I was dealing with family stuff. I could see it in their eyes, Sympathy mixed with that awkwardness people feel when they want to help, but know better than to ask. Weeks passed, then a month, and slowly, my parents stopped trying to act like it was all okay. The tone changed. My dad called me one night while I was reviewing house prices online. Not for Mason, but for something else. Something mine. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice low and frustrated. "Mason's starting a family. Claire's pregnant. What happened between you? It's ancient history. You need to grow up and move on." I remember gripping the phone and closing my eyes. "He got my wife pregnant," I said, "while we were still married." Dad was silent for a beat. Then, "And you think you're the only one who's ever been hurt? You think Mason didn't struggle with guilt? You think Claire didn't cry herself to sleep over this? They're trying, Elliot. They're making it right. But you? You're just sitting in some motel, licking your wounds like a child." That was the first time I felt something new. Disgust. Not just at Mason, but at my father. At the man who used to tell me that hard work and loyalty meant something. At the man who said families should always stick together. What he really meant was, as long as it's convenient. I didn't answer him. I just hung up. That week, my parents invited me to dinner. I wasn't planning to go, but something in me shifted. I wanted to see them. See their faces when they talked about Mason and Claire. See how they danced around the betrayal like it didn't matter. So I showed up. I wore a clean shirt, combed my hair, even brought a bottle of wine. Mom greeted me like nothing had happened. "You look great, honey," she beamed, pulling me into a hug. Dad gave me a firm handshake and nodded, like we were old business partners finally settling a deal. Dinner was surreal. Claire wasn't there, thankfully. Just the three of us. Roast chicken, potatoes, some salad that tasted like guilt. They talked about the weather, about renovations at the boutique, about how Mason was finally growing up. I sat there, sipping wine, nodding like a stranger who wandered into the wrong house. Then my mom brought out a folder. "I know it's a bit soon," she said, sliding it across the table, "but this is the paperwork for the house. We thought we could put it in your name at first, then transfer it to theirs later once they're stable. That way, it's more secure for the loan. Your father can help co-sign if needed." I stared at the folder, then looked up at her. "You already applied for the loan?" She gave a nervous smile. "We pre-filled a few things, just to get the ball rolling." My dad leaned forward. "This is what families do, Elliot. We help each other." I slowly pushed the folder back toward them. "And when exactly were you going to ask me?" Dad's jaw tightened. "You agreed, Elliot." I said it sounded fair, I said. That doesn't mean I was serious. The air went still. Mom's face fell. Dad clenched his fists. "You said you'd do it," she said quietly. "You promised." I said what you wanted to hear. I replied, my voice flat. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd take this." Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "So this was all a joke to you?" "No," I said, rising to meet his eyes. "This was a test. And you failed." I walked out without another word. That night, I got a message from Mason. Long, rambling, full of faux empathy. "Hey man, I don't know what they said, but I never asked for any of this. Claire and I just want peace. I know we messed up. I'm sorry, all right. But the baby's coming, and we need to be a family now. I hope you can be part of that. I really do. Part of their family." I didn't respond. A week later, my boss called me into his office. I assumed it was about my drop in performance or my remote work status. But instead, he closed the door, folded his hands, and asked gently, "Are you okay, Elliot?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Family stuff." He nodded. "You don't have to tell me everything. But whatever it is, it's bleeding into everything else. And I want you to know, you have options." That's when it clicked. I did have options. They thought they could corner me, that they could pressure me into paying for their perfect little family unit and call it closure. But what they didn't realize is, I'd been preparing for something else. Every condescending message, every passive-aggressive guilt trip, every moment of emotional blackmail, it was fuel. And now, I had a plan. A quiet, careful, patient plan. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. And when it came, they'd never see it coming. After I walked out of that dinner, the one where my parents casually handed me a real estate folder like it was a birthday card, I didn't go back to the motel. I didn't go home either. I drove. No destination. Just highways and empty roads. The hum of the engine and the blur of headlights became the only things that made sense. I needed distance. From them. From everything. I must have driven for 6 hours, crossing state lines before I even realized I'd done it. I pulled into a rest stop somewhere in Northern California just before sunrise. The parking lot was empty, the vending machines buzzing in that weird, fluorescent silence. I sat on a bench, sipping a stale cup of coffee from a machine that tasted like burnt pennies, and I felt it. Rock bottom. I wasn't just grieving Claire anymore, or Mason, or my parents. I was grieving the version of myself that thought doing the right thing meant everything would eventually work out. That if I was steady, kind, and loyal, people would treat me the same. That lie was gone now. And in its place, nothing. Just this hollow ache and a long, stretching silence. For the next 2 weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. I used some PTO, turned off notifications, and let the world forget about me. I rented a cheap Airbnb in a quiet town by the coast, a single-room cottage behind an older woman's house. Her name was Edith. She had a white cat named Franklin and a husband who played violin at night in the living room while she hummed. She didn't ask many questions, just told me the key was under the frog statue and left a loaf of banana bread on the table. That place saved me. Not all at once. At first, I just slept. 12, 13 hours at a time. Then I walked. Long walks along the cliffs and beaches. I deleted social media. I started writing. Not anything structured, just thoughts scattered like leaves on a page. Regret, anger, guilt. I wrote letters I never sent. One to Claire, one to Mason, one to my parents. They weren't for them. They were for me. I needed to get it out, to say what I'd swallowed for years. And then, slowly, I began to think about the future. What I wanted. Not what people needed from me. Not what I was supposed to do. What I actually wanted. The thought scared me. Because for so long, my identity had been wrapped in being the stable one. The fixer. The older brother who didn't complain. The son who said yes. But what if I said no? What if I built something just for me? One evening, as I sat on the porch watching Franklin stalk a moth with all the intensity of a lion, Edith came out and handed me a cup of tea. She sat beside me, both of us watching the cat. "You're not from around here," she said gently. "But you've got the look of someone who's been carrying other people's weight for too long." I gave a half smile. "That obvious?" She shrugged. "Only to people who've done it." I didn't tell her everything, but I told her enough. About the betrayal, the pressure, the absurdity of being asked to fund someone else's happy ending. She listened quietly. Then she said something that stayed with me. "Sometimes, when people see you as reliable, they forget you're human. They turn you into a ladder. Something to climb. But ladders break, Elliot. And when they do, no one checks if they're okay. They just find a new one." That night, I decided I wouldn't be a ladder anymore. I spent the next few weeks reevaluating my entire life. Where I worked, where I lived, who I gave energy to. I knew I couldn't go back to Oregon as the same person. That guy, Elliot the fixer, was gone. I started looking into job options. Not because I hated my old job, but because I realized I'd stayed out of habit. Safe money, predictable hours. But it didn't mean anything. I wanted something where I wasn't just crunching numbers for other people's gain. So I dusted off an idea I'd shelved years ago, a consulting firm, helping small businesses streamline operations, manage growth, and get financially stable without corporate BS. I knew the game. I'd played it long enough. Why not build my own? I reached out to old contacts. A former manager. 2 clients who liked working with me. I pitched the idea. They were intrigued. One even said, "You should have done this years ago." By the end of the month, I had a business plan, a mock website, and 3 clients lined up for remote consulting. Small steps, but it felt like breathing again. I moved out of the motel and found a small apartment in Bend, 3 hours from my hometown. Far enough to breathe, close enough to be dangerous, in case I needed to be. It wasn't fancy. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, creaky floors. But it was mine. I hung nothing on the walls. Kept it simple, clean, peaceful. Therapy helped too. I found someone local, a woman named Carla. She was blunt, didn't coddle, and asked hard questions. The kind that made you sit in silence for a minute too long. She asked me what forgiveness meant to me. I said I didn't know anymore. She said, "Then don't worry about forgiving them yet. Just stop letting them live in your head rent-free." That hit hard. So I started setting boundaries. When my mom called, I let it ring. When Mason texted a baby bump photo with "excited to meet your future niece," I blocked his number. When Claire emailed asking for closure, I archived it. I didn't scream. I didn't reply. I just let the silence be my answer. And the more I didn't react, the more they did. My mom started leaving voicemails. At first calm, then guilt-laced, then angry. I don't understand how you can be so cold, Elliot. Family doesn't turn its back during hard times. If you can't support your own blood, who will you support? Each one was like a pebble hitting a window. Annoying, but not enough to break me. Then came the invitation. A cream-colored envelope, delivered to my new apartment. No return address, just elegant handwriting. You're invited to the baby shower of Claire and Mason. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was hurt, but because it was proof. They still thought I could be guilt back into their fantasy. Inside, a note from my mom. We're hoping you'll make it. It would mean so much to Mason. We'll even set aside a special seat for you, away from Claire if that helps. Please consider it. I laughed out loud. A special seat. Like I was some bitter, distant relative, not the guy who got stabbed in the back. I didn't respond. But that invitation did something else. It made the timing clear. The baby was due soon, which meant pressure would start mounting. Money, housing, chaos. They thought I'd cave before the storm hit. They didn't know I'd already bought a house. Not for them, for me. Cash. Small, but perfectly located. I'd been watching one pop up on a foreclosure list for months. A place Mason had once joked about wanting to flip, back when he had delusions of becoming a real estate mogul. The seller had dropped the price after some zoning drama. I pounced, closed the deal silently. Through a trust. No one knew it was me. Why? Because sometimes revenge isn't a knife. It's a chess move. I started fixing it up. Quietly. Methodically. Not to live in, but to use. Paint. Flooring. New wiring. A few old contacts from my dad's construction days owed me favors. I cashed them in. And all the while, I waited. Because sometimes, rising isn't loud. It's silent. By the time summer rolled around, I had everything I needed. Cash in the bank, my business gaining traction, and silence. That was the most important part. Silence. I'd stopped defending myself. Stopped explaining. I let them talk themselves in circles while I rebuilt in the shadows. And while Mason and Claire were busy posting baby bump selfies and staging their Pinterest nursery in my parents' garage, I was preparing something far more permanent. And far more surgical. The house I bought wasn't much to look at on the outside. Peeling paint, crooked shutters, an overgrown yard with a for sale sign still leaning half-collapsed in the grass. But the foundation was solid, the bones were strong, and the zoning history? That's where things got interesting. See, what no one knew, not my parents, not Mason, not even most of the neighbors, was that the plot next to the house I'd bought was technically part of an old, unclaimed subdivision. There'd been a developer who went bankrupt during the 2008 crash, leaving behind half-finished plans and one particularly valuable parcel of land, one that had access to the only service alley on the block, which meant, legally, I had the power to restrict or grant easement rights for utilities, trash pickup, and even driveway access for 2 adjacent homes. Guess which house my parents lived in? I didn't jump on it right away. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I focused on what I could control, improving the house itself. I hired a landscape crew to clear the yard, had the interior gutted and modernized, even had the roof replaced. My contractor, Pete, was an old friend from high school who owed me after I helped him sort through a messy IRS audit a few years back. He didn't ask questions, just did the work and laughed whenever I dropped by. You planning on flipping this place or living in it? He asked one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. Something like that, I said, handing him a bottle of water. It's not for me. It's for family. He gave me a look. The good kind of family, or the kind you leave off the Christmas card list? I smirked. The kind that learns a lesson the hard way. By early August, the house was nearly finished. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, fully remodeled kitchen, hardwood floors. I didn't furnish it. I left it intentionally empty, because its purpose wasn't to be lived in. Not really. It was a chess piece. A statement. And the only thing missing from the board was a good reason to move it into play. That's when my mother gave me one. It started with a voicemail, soft, tentative, almost sweet. Elliot, sweetheart, I know we haven't spoken in a while. I miss you. We all do. Your niece is due any day now. Claire's been asking about you. She's nervous. I know things have been messy, but maybe it's time. Maybe we can all start fresh. Come home. It was manipulative, of course. A thinly veiled ploy. But it gave me an idea. I waited a day, then called her back. I kept my voice neutral. Calm. Mom, I said, I've been thinking a lot lately. And you're right. Maybe it is time. She practically gasped with relief. Oh, honey, thank you. Mason will be so glad. And Claire, I want to help, I interrupted. But not just financially. I want to be involved. If I'm going to be part of this family again, I need to feel like it's equal. Like I have a real role. There was a pause. Then, carefully, of course. Of course you do. I baited the hook. Over the next week, I began to play a careful game. I visited them. Showed up with gifts, baby onesies, diapers, even a high-end stroller I knew Claire would drool over. Mason looked wary, but my parents were thrilled. They called it healing. Said I was finally stepping into my uncle role. They didn't realize I was studying them, observing how much space they had, how many arguments happened behind the scenes. The pressure of an impending newborn was clearly cracking their perfect image. One night after dinner, Mason pulled me aside. We stood on the back porch, crickets chirping, a cheap citronella candle burning low. Look, man, he started, rubbing the back of his neck. I know things got messed up, and I know I should have said something sooner. But I never meant to hurt you. I stayed quiet. He glanced at me. Claire, she never planned for it to happen either. It just did. I know that sounds lame, but you love her? I asked. He hesitated. Yeah, I do. I nodded. Then be ready to prove it. He blinked. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Just patted his shoulder and walked back inside. Because here's the thing. I wasn't interested in an apology. I wasn't interested in fake forgiveness or half-truths. I wanted consequences, not out of spite, but because it was the only language any of them ever understood. I began planting seeds. I told my parents I'd been looking into buying Mason and Claire a house. Something small like they asked. I even showed them photos, mock listings I pulled from Zillow, doctored slightly to match the specs of the house I actually owned. I told them I'd need their help. Co-signing, of course, since technically it would be for Mason, and I wanted to keep the transaction under his name to make it special. They agreed, thrilled to finally see me coming around. Then I made a separate call to a friend of mine named Jenna who worked in real estate law. I explained the situation in careful detail, and we drafted a temporary lease agreement and property use clause that would allow me to retain full control of the house while creating the appearance of ownership transfer. Just enough to make it believable. Just enough to build hope. The next step was critical. I offered to let Mason and Claire move in early. Just for a month, I told my parents. While we finalize everything. The baby's almost here. They need space. You guys are exhausted. Why not let them settle into the new place? They agreed immediately. Claire was over the moon. Mason looked skeptical, but kept quiet. I handed over a single key. I even helped them move in, hauling boxes, setting up the crib, installing shelves in the kitchen. Claire cried when she saw the backyard. Said it was perfect. And for a week, it was. They thought they'd won. My parents beamed. This is what family's about, my mom said during a celebratory dinner. Putting the past behind us. I smiled. Sure is. The baby was born 2 days later. A girl. They named her Ivy. My mom sent me a photo. Mason holding her, red-faced and squirming, Claire smiling beside him. My dad captioned it. You're an uncle now. Officially. And that's when I made the call. Back to Jenna. File it, I said. Every clause. Every hold. Every restriction. Because the house wasn't a gift. It was a trap. Over the next 2 weeks, I did what I'd been quietly preparing for. I transferred the trust ownership to a shell LLC I controlled. I revoked any implied lease rights. I installed security cameras. And I filed notice with the local zoning office that due to unresolved easement issues, all service access, trash pickup, water maintenance, even power grid access, needed to be reassessed across 3 properties, including my parents. It created immediate chaos. The first call came from Mason. Dude, why is the power flickering? The trash guys didn't come, and some lady from the city left a notice on the door about something needing to be cleared. I played dumb. Oh, weird. I'll check with my contractor. Then came the call from my mom. Elliot, what's going on with the city notices? They said there's a legal hold on access. I sighed, pretending to be frustrated. I don't know, Mom. Might have something to do with the zoning dispute from the last owner. These things take time. She paused. But you own it now, right? You can fix it. I smiled into the phone. I'm working on it. And the best part? They couldn't ask too many questions because they were living there unofficially. No lease. No contract. No paper trail. They'd moved in based on trust. The very thing they destroyed in me. And now? It was my turn. The final piece was still coming. One last move. But I waited. Patient. Precise. Just like they taught me. The meltdown didn't happen all at once. It unraveled the same way everything else in my family always had. Slowly, painfully, and in full view of everyone who'd pretended nothing was wrong. It started with the utilities. First, trash pickup stopped entirely. Bags piled up in the garage, then the side yard. Claire tried calling the city. Mason tried calling the service company. Everyone pointed fingers and said it was a zoning issue tied to the property records. Then the water pressure dropped. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make showers frustrating and laundry impossible. Finally, one afternoon, the power went out for 3 hours and didn't come back until evening. That's when panic set in. Mason called me 6 times in one day. I answered the 7th. "Elliot, man, this is getting serious," he said, trying to sound calm but failing. "Claire's exhausted. The baby's barely sleeping. Your parents are freaking out because their house is getting notices too. We need this fixed." I leaned back in my chair at home, my home, and kept my voice steady. "I told you, Mason. These things take time. Legal stuff. You said you were handling it," he snapped. "I am," I replied. "But handling something doesn't mean snapping my fingers." There was silence on the line. Then, quieter. "Are you doing this on purpose?" I almost laughed. "Almost. What would make you think that?" I asked. He hung up. The next morning, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. I watched them on the door camera for a full minute before opening it. My mom looked exhausted. My dad looked angry in that familiar, simmering way that used to scare me as a kid. "Enough," Dad said as soon as I opened the door. "We need answers. Now." I stepped aside and let them in. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten dinner alone for months, rebuilding myself piece by piece. My mom clasped her hands tightly. "Elliot," she said, voice trembling, "this has gone too far. The baby can't live like this. Claire's crying all the time. Mason hasn't slept in days. If there's something you're not telling us." "There is," I said calmly. Both of them froze. I reached into a folder I'd prepared weeks earlier and slid it across the table. Not aggressively, not dramatically, just deliberately. "What's this?" my dad asked. "Property records," I said. "Zoning documents. Trust ownership. Easement rights. Everything you didn't bother asking about when you assumed I'd buy a house for your favorite son." My mom flipped through the pages, her face draining of color with each one. "You don't own the house," she whispered. "Not really." "I do," I corrected. "Just not in the way you assumed. I never transferred ownership. I never promised to. And I never signed anything giving Mason or Claire tenancy rights." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "You tricked us." "No," I said evenly. "You tricked yourselves. I just stopped correcting you." Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. My mom's eyes welled up. "Why would you do this to us?" I leaned forward. "You asked me to buy a house for the man who got my wife pregnant. You asked me to fund their future so you wouldn't have to face the consequences of your favoritism. And when I hesitated, you accused me of being selfish." Dad scoffed. "This isn't about favoritism. This is about family." "No," I said. "This is about control." That's when I laid it all out. The documentation, the calls, the texts, the loan paperwork they'd pre-filled without my consent, the way they'd decided, without discussion, that my role was to sacrifice so Mason wouldn't have to. "You didn't want peace," I said. "You wanted convenience. And you thought I'd fold like I always do." My dad looked at me for a long time. Then quietly, "So what now?" I stood up. "Now," I said, "they move out." My mom gasped. "You can't be serious." "I am. They're living there illegally. And starting tomorrow, I'm enforcing it." "You'd throw your brother and a newborn out on the street?" Dad demanded. "No," I said. "I'm giving them 30 days. More than the law requires. More than I was ever given." My mom broke down then, crying hard, shoulders shaking. She begged. She apologized. She said she didn't realize how deep the hurt went. She said she just wanted everyone together again. I listened, truly listened. Then I said, "You don't get togetherness by crushing one person to hold everyone else up." They left without another word. The fallout was immediate. Mason exploded. Texts, calls, accusations. He called me bitter, vindictive. He said I was punishing a child who'd done nothing wrong. Claire emailed me long paragraphs about forgiveness and growth, and how holding on to anger would poison me. I didn't reply. They moved back into my parents' house 2 weeks later. That's when the second shoe dropped. "See," The zoning reassessment didn't just affect utilities. It triggered a property tax review, one my parents had avoided for years due to outdated valuations tied to that same forgotten subdivision. The reassessment tripled their tax bill. Suddenly, they couldn't afford to keep everyone under one roof. My dad called me one last time. "We're thinking of selling," he said quietly. "The house." "I know," I replied. "What?" he asked. "I made an offer," I said. "Through my LLC." He didn't speak for a long time. "You planned this," he finally said. "Yes," I replied. "Because you taught me planning matters." They sold. Not to me directly. To the LLC, which I dissolved a month later and transferred into my name. I didn't move in. I rented it out. At market rate. Mason and Claire moved into a cramped apartment across town. My parents downsized to a condo and stopped calling. My mom sent one last message on my birthday. "I hope one day you can forgive us." I stared at it for a while. Then I deleted it. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about deciding who gets access to you moving forward. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I simply stopped being the bigger man. And for the first time in my life, everything finally fit.